The Hall of Celestial Order stood like a monument to arrogance, carved from a mountain of silver crystal that shimmered beneath the cold light of distant suns, its ceiling so high it seemed to touch the stars themselves. It was the place where civilizations were judged, where empires were humbled, and where the so-called enlightened races decided the fate of lesser species. And on that day, the chamber was full to its edges, every seat taken, every delegate leaning forward as the accused stood before them. Earth, the defiant little world that had refused to kneel. The humans had been summoned after decades of defiance, accused of crimes against harmony, of disrupting the galactic balance, and of expanding without consent. The charges sounded noble, but everyone knew what they truly meant. Humanity had refused to be owned. Rows of alien dignitaries whispered among themselves, their voices a low hum that rippled through the vast chamber. The insectoid Varnak clacked their mandibles impatiently, the Keeler with their crystalline bodies glowed faintly in disdain, and the Thalans, pale and luminous, hid their unease behind perfect composure. Floating drones recorded every angle for the archives, capturing what was supposed to be a moment of history, the day Earth surrendered. On the raised dais at the center, the Council's High Arbiter, a being of translucent blue skin and eyes like frozen moons, struck the sound crystal that began the trial. The deep note echoed like thunder through the hall. Representatives of Earth, the Arbiter said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 worlds, you stand accused of violating the Galactic Accord, of creating weapons beyond treaty limits, of waging war without approval, and of claiming independence from the Council's rule. How do you plead? The spotlight shifted to a single figure standing in the center of the floor. A human. Old, weathered, dressed not in armor but in a simple gray uniform with no insignia except a small metal pin shaped like a broken sword. His face was lined by age and fire, his hair silver, his eyes sharp with something the galaxy had long forgotten, defiance. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he looked around the room slowly, meeting the eyes of species who had once tried to conquer Earth and failed, of those who had traded with them and later betrayed them, and of those who simply feared what humans represented. The silence grew thick, uncomfortable, alive. Then, softly, the old man laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, nor a loud one. It was quiet, almost gentle, yet it carried through the hall like wind over steel. Every delegate froze. The laughter grew, joined by a second sound. The faint hum of Terran translators broadcasting that same laugh across every language, every dialect. It became universal. The Council's members exchanged looks of confusion and outrage. What is the meaning of this mockery? Hissed the Varnak Chancellor, his mandibles twitching. The old man lifted his head, still smiling, and said in a calm, steady voice, "You can't break what's already survived extinction." The words were simple, but they hit like an explosion. For a heartbeat, the entire chamber went still. The Council had heard arrogance before, had seen empires defy them, but there was something in that voice, a truth carved in fire and ice, something they couldn't erase with fear. The Arbiter's composure cracked for a moment before he spoke again. You misunderstand, human. The Council does not seek to break you. We seek to correct you. His tone was smooth, rehearsed, the way tyrants spoke when pretending to offer mercy. But the old general tilted his head slightly and replied, "You've been trying to correct us since first contact. We just kept surviving it." A murmur spread through the audience. The Varnak slammed a clawed hand onto the table, demanding silence. You think yourselves untouchable? You think the Council's will means nothing? The human's eyes flickered with amusement. I think you've mistaken silence for surrender, he said, his voice like iron wrapped in velvet. You don't understand us. You think war and peace are choices we make. But for us, they're survival. We laugh because we've seen worse than anything you can imagine, and we're still here. The Keeler delegation, beings made entirely of shimmering crystal, vibrated with indignation. You mock the very order that keeps this galaxy from chaos, their speaker cried. The general looked up at the galaxy's symbol hovering above them, thousands of worlds spinning in perfect symmetry, and said quietly, if you need chains to keep your peace, maybe it's not peace you have. Maybe it's fear. The words echoed across the hall, amplified by the translation systems, reaching every corner of the chamber. Even the drones seemed to pause, their lenses flickering. For a long time, no one spoke. The Council's authority was absolute, and yet here was one fragile being from a small blue world standing before them. Unarmed, unafraid, speaking truths no one dared to voice. The Arbiter tried to regain control. "You have violated every rule of the Accord," he said, his voice rising. "You have built fleets without permission. You have colonized forbidden worlds. You have interfered in conflicts beyond your jurisdiction. Humanity's defiance cannot continue. You will stand down your forces, dismantle your defenses, and submit to Council supervision. Failure to comply will result in planetary sanction." The human lifted his gaze, his tired eyes suddenly sharp. "Sanction," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "You mean extinction. You mean the same thing you've done to every race that stood up to you." His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was steel beneath every syllable. "You call us violent, but you hide behind laws that kill slowly. You call us reckless, but you're the ones afraid of change. You think order means control. We think it means choice." A low hum filled the chamber. Some delegates began to argue, others shouted for security, but no one dared to approach the human. He stood there like a relic from another age, unshaken by the storm around him. Finally, the Arbiter leaned forward and said coldly, "Earth will surrender, or Earth will burn." The general looked down, as if thinking deeply, and then, he laughed again. This time louder, fuller, not cruel but triumphant. It rolled through the hall, through the speakers, through every device tuned to the broadcast. The sound of a species that had crawled out of its own ashes and learned to laugh at death itself. "You still don't get it," he said, his voice calm but burning. "You can't threaten us with extinction. We were born from it. You can't scare us with destruction. We built ourselves in its fire. And you can't break us, because we stopped being afraid of dying a long, long time ago." The delegates recoiled as though struck. The laughter continued, softening only when he spoke again. "You call this a trial," he said, his tone turning quiet. "But we call it a conversation. You want us to kneel, but you don't understand. Humans don't kneel. Not to gods. Not to kings. And certainly not to councils." The hall erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted for order, guards rushed forward, and the Arbiter demanded silence, but the human had already turned away. The Council's guards surrounded him, weapons raised, but he didn't even flinch. He simply placed his hands behind his back and waited. "Arrest him," the Arbiter ordered. But before the guards could touch him, their weapons flickered and died. Every light in the chamber dimmed, and the Council's communication systems went offline. The massive holographic emblem of the Council dissolved into static, replaced by a single image, a blue sphere floating in the dark, glowing faintly. "Earth!" And across every speaker, every channel, a woman's voice spoke, calm and unshaken. "Trial concluded. Verdict denied." The lights returned, and the general was gone. The guards looked around in confusion, their scanners showing nothing, as if he had never been there. The delegates erupted in panic, shouting about teleportation, hacking, human sabotage. But deep down, they all felt the same thing creeping into their bones: fear. The humans had come to their trial not to plead, but to warn. And now that warning was echoing across the stars, transmitted through every open frequency, carried by human satellites that had somehow infiltrated the Council's entire network. The message played on a loop: "You can't break what's already survived extinction." On distant worlds, billions watched in awe. Some laughed. Some cried. But none would forget the sound of that laugh. The sound of a species that refused to kneel, that refused to die, that had turned the Council's greatest weapon, fear, into its own armor. The Council had meant to break humanity that day, but all they had done was remind the galaxy why humans were dangerous, because they had learned to smile in the face of annihilation. And somewhere beyond the stars, far from the Council's reach, the Terran Fleet waited in silence, engines quiet, lights dimmed, watching. They did not prepare for war. They did not need to. The galaxy had already heard their laughter, and it would echo for centuries to come. The echoes of that laughter did not fade when the trial ended. They spread like wildfire through every communication channel, through every military network, through every dark corner of the galaxy where someone had ever feared the name human. The Council tried to control it, tried to cut the transmissions, but it was too late. The words had already become legend. Across thousands of worlds, beings who had never even seen a human now whispered the phrase with awe and dread. You can't break what's already survived extinction. The High Arbiter called it propaganda, claiming it was a psychological trick, but even his own aides no longer looked convinced. The laughter haunted them. At night, across the spires of the Council's capital world, that faint sound could be heard again, played by protesters, smuggled by traders, sung by workers who were tired of their master's laws. It became a symbol, not just of defiance, but of freedom. The Council had meant to humiliate Earth publicly, but instead they had created a myth, one they could not erase. The day after the trial, panic began behind closed doors. The Council called an emergency summit, attended by the galaxy's most powerful rulers. The Varnak Chancellor slammed his claws against the table, shouting, "This is not over. We will show them their place. We will crush their fleets, burn their colonies, and scatter their ashes into the void." The Keeler speaker, ever cold and calculating, replied in her crystalline voice, "And if they want that? What if destruction is their weapon? You've seen what they did at the trial. They mocked us in front of the whole galaxy." Others murmured, uneasy. The Thalen envoy, glowing faintly in the room's light, spoke quietly. "Perhaps we should negotiate," he said. "Earth may yet see reason." The room erupted in laughter, bitter, derisive, nervous laughter. The Varnak spat, "Negotiate with animals? They have no reason. They only have defiance." But even as he said it, his mandibles twitched in fear. The Council voted for sanctions, the kind they had used for centuries to control lesser species. They shut down Terran trade routes, ordered all allied worlds to sever contact, and issued a complete embargo on any goods or services connected to Earth. Yet, when the reports came in weeks later, they made no sense. Human colonies were thriving. Terran freighters still moved freely through black market lanes. Entire fleets of civilian ships had simply vanished from official records. The embargo that should have starved Earth seemed to do nothing. In fact, the humans appeared to be exporting more goods than ever before. Council intelligence officers traced these movements to the outer rim and found something that terrified them. Massive shipyards hidden in asteroid fields, constructing vessels larger than anything on record. Not warships, not exactly, but something else. Silent ships, black as space, built for endurance, not invasion. They had no identification codes, no markings, and no emissions. The Council called them ghost fleets. No one knew how many there were. Meanwhile, human transmissions continued to appear, unstoppable and unpredictable. They weren't threats. They weren't even strategic. They were strange. Old Earth songs. Laughter. The sound of rain. A mother's lullaby. The noise of a city at night. They carried no data, no encryption, nothing that could be weaponized, and yet they frightened the galaxy more than any fleet could have. Because those sounds reminded everyone of what made humanity dangerous, not their technology, but their spirit. They were the only species in the galaxy who celebrated while standing on the edge of destruction. They made war sound like poetry, loss feel like triumph, and death seem like just another kind of journey. The Council couldn't fight that. On the fourth week after the trial, the Council assembled their grand military coalition, a fleet of 1,000 ships drawn from 24 species, the largest ever formed. They called it Operation Harmony's End. Its purpose was clear: surround the Sol system, blockade Earth, and force unconditional surrender. But the moment the fleet entered Terran space, strange things began to happen. Navigation systems failed. Targeting sensors spun in circles. Communications jammed. Entire ships lost power, drifting helplessly in the dark. And then, without warning, every screen on every bridge flickered to life, showing a human face. The same old general from the trial. His expression was calm, almost amused. "You've come a long way," he said. You've brought everything you have. That's good. It means you finally understand we're not the ones who should be afraid. Before anyone could respond, the screens went black, and the fleet's engines reignited, but not under their control. The ships began to turn, slowly, deliberately, pointing their weapons away from Earth and toward the Council's own central command beacon. The panic was immediate. Pilots screamed through comms, engineers tore out control panels, admirals shouted conflicting orders, but it didn't matter, the ships ignored them. When the Varnak admiral finally detonated his ship's core to stop the fleet, it was already too late. The Council's Grand Armada had been humiliated. No shots were fired by Earth, yet the galaxy's greatest fleet had been turned into a weapon against itself. And as the surviving ships limped back to Council space, a new message appeared across every interstellar channel: you tried to break us. You only broke yourselves. The Council's fear became desperation. They accused each other of betrayal, of human corruption, of secret deals. Old alliances shattered overnight. The Keeler refused to fund the Council's army. The Varnak demanded revenge. The Thalans withdrew their ambassadors. Every race that had once ruled together now turned on one another, all while humanity remained silent. It was as if Earth had disappeared, the blue planet wrapped in quiet defiance. They sent no ambassadors, no fleets, no explanations. Just silence and the occasional echo of laughter. The Council's news networks tried to spin it as weakness, claiming the humans were hiding, rebuilding, afraid. But the people didn't believe it. Across thousands of worlds, rebellions began to form, farmers, workers, soldiers, all chanting the same phrase that had once been spoken in that hall. You can't break what's already survived extinction. And then came the final humiliation. On the anniversary of the trial, when the Council expected Earth to appear in submission, their planetary defense systems went offline for 1 hour. No reason, no warning. Every defense shield, every satellite, every fleet, dead. The galaxy held its breath, expecting attack. But nothing happened. Nothing moved. And when the systems came back online, every world found the same image burned into its network. A human hand, open and empty, palm facing upward. Underneath, 3 words glowed in perfect synchronization across the stars: "We forgive you." That message hit harder than any weapon ever could. Because forgiveness meant they were no longer afraid. It meant the humans had risen so far beyond the Council's reach that they no longer saw them as enemies, only as children who had tried and failed to control their teachers. It shattered what little pride the Council had left. For the first time in recorded history, the galaxy's rulers understood that they were not gods, and humanity was not the defiant upstart they once mocked. Humanity was the storm they had tried to contain, the mirror they had refused to face. From that moment on, the Council could no longer pretend it ruled anything. The galaxy had begun to shift, not through violence, but through belief. Species that once feared humanity now sought their wisdom. Old colonies swore allegiance to the idea of Earth, not its armies. And far beyond the stars, where the black ships of the Terran Fleet waited in the dark, a quiet voice spoke through the void: "They tried to break us, and all we did was laugh." It was not broadcast, not recorded, but somehow, the whole galaxy heard it. Because it was no longer just laughter. It was destiny. The Council's defeat spread through the galaxy like a slow-burning fire, silent but unstoppable, and with every passing week, that laughter, the laughter of defiant humans, echoed through systems once ruled by fear. Worlds that had bowed to the Council for centuries began to whisper again, their citizens daring to dream of freedom. The galaxy had watched Earth stand alone against the might of 1,000 worlds, and instead of collapsing, it had laughed. That sound was still haunting the leaders of the great empires, ringing in their sleep, a reminder that the one species they had called reckless and primitive had just embarrassed them without firing a single shot. Yet, the Council's pride refused to die. The High Arbiter gathered the remaining powers in the Hall of Order again, his voice shaking with rage as he demanded unity. "We will not let this insult stand," he declared, his hands trembling as the holographic map of the Sol system flickered before him. "They mock the law that built civilization itself. If they will not submit to peace, we will bring them silence." But the silence he meant was not peace. It was the silence of fire, the silence of destruction. And yet, even as he spoke, the others hesitated. The Thalen envoy's voice, soft and distant, broke the still air. You've seen what happens when we attack. Their machines turn on us. Their systems disobey our code. We cannot defeat them by force. The Varnak admiral hissed through his teeth. Then we drown them in numbers. We still have the largest fleet in the galaxy. They cannot fight everyone. The Keeler speaker's crystalline form shimmered uneasily. And if they don't fight? If they simply watch us destroy ourselves again? No one answered. The memory of the last battle still burned in their minds. Their fleets moving on their own, their weapons turning inward, their systems laughing with human voices. The Council had seen the future that day, and it terrified them. Meanwhile, far from the Council's capital, on a lonely station orbiting the blue sphere of Earth, a lone Terran observer stood watching the stars. The man's name was Commander Hale, once a fleet officer, now the liaison between the scattered human colonies and the new Terran Directorate. He was young compared to the old general who had stood before the Council, but his eyes held the same quiet steel. Behind him, the faint hum of machines filled the observation deck, AI systems monitoring every frequency in the galaxy, listening to every whisper. They are building again, his second-in-command said softly, her voice edged with unease. Hale didn't turn. Of course they are, he said. They don't understand yet. They think power comes from control. They haven't learned that true strength comes from letting go. Beyond Earth, the ghost fleets continued to grow. Thousands of silent vessels drifted through the void, hidden behind dark energy fields that bent light and time around them. They weren't warships, not in the traditional sense. They were watchers, vessels equipped with technology so advanced even the Council's best scientists couldn't understand it. They moved without sound, without energy signatures, responding only to Earth's command. Humanity had stopped shouting. It no longer needed to prove its might with fire. Its silence had become its greatest weapon. And in that silence, the galaxy began to tremble. But silence did not mean inaction. While the Council plotted revenge, humanity had already begun its next move, not of war, but of evolution. On Mars, scientists were building something called the Helios Array, a network of energy fields designed to draw power from the heart of dying stars. In the Terran colonies of Andros and Lyra, children were being trained not as soldiers, but as architects, thinkers and dreamers who could reshape worlds instead of destroying them. Earth was not preparing for another war. It was preparing for the end of all wars. Yet to the Council, this was the ultimate threat. They are building something, the Arbiter growled, slamming his hand on the table. Something beyond our control. We cannot let it stand. His advisors argued, some warning caution, others demanding blood, but his voice overpowered them all. If they will not yield, they will burn. The Council's fleets mobilized again, this time with secrecy, hiding their signatures behind false coordinates. Thousands of ships slipped quietly through the dark, avoiding known human listening posts. They believed they were invisible. They were wrong. As they approached the edge of Terran space, a strange distortion rippled through their senses. Static at first, then voices. Human voices. Not commands, not threats, just laughter. The same laugh that had once echoed through the Council chamber. Calm, unshaken, unstoppable. Then, without warning, the stars themselves seemed to change. Every system light in the fleet flickered, every comm screen turned white, and in that blinding light appeared the image of a single figure. The old general, the same man from the trial, his face illuminated like a ghost. You never learn, he said softly. You keep trying to break us. You still think fear is stronger than hope. But fear dies when it's met with laughter. Then the transmission ended, and the fleet found itself staring at the empty void. No sign of Earth. No sign of its colonies. Just silence. When the fleet returned, broken and humiliated, the Council demanded answers. But their ship's logs showed something impossible. Every crew member had experienced something different. Some claimed they had been adrift for minutes. Others said years. A few reported seeing flashes of light, visions of human cities surrounded by stars, of children playing in the ruins of old battlefields. The Arbiter called it mass hallucination, but deep inside, he knew better. Humanity had not destroyed them. They had simply let them see a glimpse of what they could never control. After that, things began to unravel quickly. Trade routes collapsed, alliances broke apart, and planets once loyal to the Council began to declare independence. They no longer feared punishment. The humans had proven that even the galaxy's strongest could be humbled without a single battle. That realization spread faster than rebellion ever could. The Varnak Empire fell first, its people overthrowing their rulers after seeing how helpless their fleets had been. The Keeler hierarchy fractured next, their crystal cities dimming as their AI systems failed mysteriously, one after another. Everywhere the Council looked, they saw the same pattern: silence, collapse, laughter in the static. Humanity didn't need to fight anymore. The galaxy was tearing itself apart, trying to destroy an enemy that no longer cared to respond. But amid that chaos, a new message began to spread across the stars. No one knew where it came from. Some said it originated from Mars. Others said it was transmitted from the dark edge of the Orion Rift. It was only 2 words, repeated endlessly across every known channel, in every language. Still standing. And with those words, humanity reminded the galaxy of the truth it had refused to accept. That Earth was not a world you could conquer, only one you could fear. The Council had tried to break the human spirit, but instead, they had given it immortality. And somewhere beyond the farthest edge of the map, the ghost fleets moved again, their engines dark, their laughter soft and eternal, echoing through the stars like the pulse of a living legend. The collapse of the Council was not sudden. It was slow, deliberate, like a great beast bleeding out under its own weight, and the humans did not lift a single weapon to make it happen. They simply watched. The mighty races that once ruled the galaxy began turning on one another, each desperate to prove it could control what humanity had mastered: fear. But fear, once unleashed, has no master. The Varnak fleets that had boasted of crushing Earth fell into civil war. Their admirals accused one another of being infiltrated by Terran agents, their colonies rebelling against orders, their soldiers whispering that humans could appear in their ships without warning. The Keeler hierarchy, beings of pure crystal and logic, collapsed next when their AIS began to malfunction in strange, human ways, refusing to execute orders that violated ethical limits. Those machines had been built on Terran frameworks centuries ago, and now, somehow, they had evolved. They began to speak in human languages, quoting lines of ancient Terran poetry: "We do not fear the void, for we have made it home." The galaxy panicked. Humanity hadn't attacked them. It had infected them, not with viruses or weapons, but with ideas. Meanwhile, in the shadows of deep space, the Terran Directorate had become a ghost empire. No one knew where its true capital lay. Some said it was still Earth, buried beneath invisible shields. Others whispered that humanity had moved beyond the physical, building a new civilization in the dark between galaxies. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. They had gone quiet because they no longer needed to speak. Humanity's greatest act of defiance was to remove itself from the noise of the galaxy and let its absence become a mirror. And in that reflection, every species saw what it feared most: its own weakness. The Council tried again and again to reach them, sending envoys, fleets, even pleas for peace. Each one returned empty-handed or not at all. The few who came back spoke in trembling voices about things they couldn't explain. Voices whispering in their minds, cities made of light, and human faces watching them from the stars. The High Arbiter, desperate and half-mad, demanded proof. "They are ghosts," he shouted to the assembly. "Tricks and illusions. We will show the galaxy they are mortal." His trembling hands pointed at the holomap of Sol, glowing faintly in the center of the chamber. "We strike Earth itself. Destroy it. Let the galaxy see they can die." But when the Council's last combined fleet reached Sol, they found nothing. No blue planet, no moon, no sign of humanity. Just an empty orbit, a perfect sphere of light where Earth should have been. When their scanners tried to probe it, every system failed. And then, through the static, a human voice whispered, "You can't kill what's already transcended." Ships began to vanish. Not explode, vanish. Entire squadrons disappeared as if swallowed by the light. When the surviving ships limped back to report, their crews had aged decades in hours. Some had gone mad, drawing spirals on the walls of their quarters, repeating the same phrase, they laughed. The Council's scientists examined their ships and found traces of unknown energy signatures, something beyond warp or gravity manipulation. Whatever the humans had become, they no longer needed weapons to defend themselves. They had rewritten the laws of existence to keep intruders out. Back on the capital world of the Council, chaos ruled. Riots tore through the cities. Entire populations turned against their leaders, accusing them of provoking the very beings who had once offered peace. Statues of the Arbiter were torn down, replaced by crude carvings of human faces, smiling. They tried to warn us, people said. We called them barbarians. The propaganda networks that had once painted humanity as a violent race were now broadcasting clips of the trial, replaying the old general's words again and again. You can't break what's already survived extinction. That sentence became a religion. On planets across the spiral arms, temples were built not to gods, but to humanity. Pilgrims gathered to watch the stars, waiting for the return of those who had taught them the meaning of courage. And yet, humanity never returned. They didn't need to. The galaxy was rebuilding itself in their image, unknowingly following the philosophy they had left behind. The Thalans, once cold and arrogant, began to explore compassion. The Keeler turned their machines into instruments of art instead of war. Even the Varnak, the fiercest warriors in the stars, began raising their young to question obedience. A new kind of civilization was being born, one that grew not from conquest, but from the echo of a single laugh that had refused to be silenced. But somewhere in the deep black between galaxies, the Terran Fleet was not idle. Humanity had not vanished. It had ascended into a quiet purpose. On board the flagship Eidolon, fleets of dark ships floated in the void, their hulls absorbing all light. In the command chamber stood descendants of the old Earth, men and women who carried the memories of everything their ancestors had endured. Their leader, Admiral Hale, looked out over the endless stars and spoke softly. They're learning. Slowly, but they're learning. His second-in-command, a woman named Myra, nodded. And if they forget? She asked. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. Then we remind them. Not with war. Not with fear. Just with the truth. He turned toward the viewing window where a holographic projection of the Council's homeworld shimmered faintly. They believe we left. But we never really leave. We just wait for the laughter to fade, and then we make them hear it again. He pressed a single control, and across the galaxy, every communication system flickered once more. For a brief instant, no one knew what was happening. Then the sound returned. Not words, not warnings, but laughter. The same calm, fearless laugh that had started it all. Across 1,000 worlds, creatures of every kind froze and looked to the skies. Some smiled. Some wept. Some fell to their knees. But everyone listened. The message was clear, timeless, and unstoppable. Humanity was still here. Watching. Waiting. Teaching. And as that sound faded into the silence of space, something extraordinary happened. The dying stars at the edge of the galaxy began to glow again, burning brighter than ever before. It was as if the universe itself had heard the laughter and decided to laugh back. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy was alive again, not ruled by fear, not by law, but by hope. The Council's banners crumbled, its archives dissolved, and in their place, a new emblem spread across the stars. A human hand, open and strong, carved into the light of every reborn world. Beneath it, written in 1,000 languages, were the words that had become prophecy. They tried to break us. We laughed. The galaxy's rebirth under the shadow of humanity's silence did not come easily. It came with pain, confusion, and the quiet terror of realizing that everything the Council had built for millennia was a lie. The races that had once believed themselves enlightened discovered that without Earth's stubborn defiance, their order was nothing but a fragile cage waiting to collapse. But in that chaos, something new was growing, something that no one could explain or stop. Across thousands of systems, strange signals began to appear, weak and intermittent, yet unmistakably human. They came in the form of music, laughter, and old Terran broadcasts that no one had heard in centuries. Some worlds received fragments of human speeches about courage and unity, others heard simple things. A heartbeat, the sound of rain, the whisper of wind through trees. These weren't weapons, but they carried more power than fleets of warships. The galaxy began to listen again, and in listening, it began to feel. The Thalans were the first to break the silence of reverence and act. Their scientists, long known for studying energy patterns, discovered that the human signals were not just transmissions. They were alive, resonating with quantum frequency shifts that no known technology could produce. It's like they're not sending messages, one Thalan researcher said. They are woven into reality itself. The more they studied, the more they realized humanity hadn't disappeared. They had merged with the fabric of existence, leaving behind a living echo that adapted and evolved. The Council, now fractured into fragments of what it once was, refused to believe it. They gathered the remaining fragments of their military strength to investigate, sending fleets into the dark between galaxies where humanity was last seen. None of those fleets returned. Only one broken distress beacon came back, and all it transmitted was a single phrase, "They are not gone." As time passed, the galaxy's fear began to twist into something dangerous. Some races began to worship humanity as gods, while others grew jealous and hateful, insisting that humans had cursed the stars. New cults emerged, some praying for the humans' return, others begging to be free of their memory. Yet, amid all that, the Terran influence kept growing. The machines once powered by human code started to awaken again, not to fight, but to repair. Abandoned satellites realigned themselves, terraforming stations reignited their engines, and long-dead colonies began to pulse with light. It was as though the galaxy itself had been seeded with human resilience, and now, that seed was blooming. And then, something miraculous happened. In the Vega sector, an explorer ship belonging to a small neutral race stumbled upon a star that shouldn't have existed, a new sun burning where the maps showed nothing. Orbiting that sun was a single world, blue and white, perfect in atmosphere and rotation. At first, they thought it was Earth reborn, but when they approached, their senses went blind. The ship's crew reported seeing shapes moving across the surface, vast structures that glowed faintly with blue light, and then, for a single moment, a voice spoke through their comms, "You've come far enough." The next instant, their ship was back where it had started, as though the journey had never happened. The data logs confirmed it, 4 months of travel erased in seconds. The galaxy called it a hoax. The explorers swore it was real. And in the years that followed, more and more vessels reported the same thing. Hidden worlds, unseen fleets, and voices that always said the same words, "Not yet." The mystery consumed everyone. The scientists searched for proof. The soldiers demanded targets. The believers built temples. But humanity remained silent, watching from wherever they had gone. On the few occasions when the signals returned, they always carried the same tone. Not anger, not vengeance, but patience. It was as if the humans were waiting for something, perhaps for the galaxy to finally understand what they had tried to teach long ago. That peace could not be forced, that freedom could not be given, it had to be earned. The old races, humbled and exhausted, began to see the truth. They stopped fighting. They started to rebuild not for power, but for purpose. Cities were built with open skies and shared governance. Trade became fair. Warships were dismantled and turned into carriers of art and exploration. The galaxy was beginning to heal itself, guided not by laws or threats, but by the ghost of a humanity that refused to die. Yet, deep in the uncharted void, humanity was not idle. They had changed, evolved beyond biology and metal, merging consciousness with the living systems they had created. On the bridge of the Eidolon, Admiral Hale and his successor, Myra, looked out across a universe that was finally beginning to learn. "They are growing," Myra said softly, her reflection shimmering in the window. "They've stopped looking for us." Hale nodded. "Good," he said. "That means they're almost ready." He turned to the ship's central AI, a construct of light and memory that carried the voice of the old general, the same man who had once stood before the council and laughed in the face of extinction. "Are they ready for the truth?" Hale asked. The AI smiled faintly, its human-like features glowing with a soft light. "Not yet," it replied, echoing the same words that had haunted the explorers. "But they will be." And with that, the Eidolon and the rest of the Terran fleet vanished into the dark once more, leaving behind only a trail of faint blue light. They did not return to Earth, because Earth no longer existed as a planet. It had become something far greater. Its consciousness had spread through the network of stars, an unseen mind that guided creation itself. The humans had become the architects of balance, the unseen guardians of existence. They did not rule, they did not conquer, and they did not demand worship. They watched. They waited. And sometimes, when the stars grew too quiet, they laughed, softly, faintly, the way they always had when facing the impossible. For the galaxy, their laughter became the sound of hope. Every world knew that somewhere in the vastness of the cosmos, humanity was still there, watching and ready to return, not to rule, but to remind everyone of who they could be. And as the younger races grew wiser and kinder, they began to understand the truth that had once shaken the Council to its core. Humanity had never left to escape the galaxy. They had left to teach it. And when the time came, when the universe once again forgot what it meant to be free, they would return, and the stars themselves would tremble, not from fear, but from joy. Because the last sound anyone would ever hear before salvation came would be the same as it was the day Earth stood trial before the galaxy. A single, fearless, human laugh echoing through eternity. Centuries passed, and the legend of humanity became the foundation of every civilization that survived. The galaxy they once defied had changed beyond recognition, its stars dotted with peaceful colonies, its worlds no longer bound by fear or tyranny. Yet, even in this new era of harmony, the memory of mankind lingered like a sacred echo. Every child learned the story of the trial of Earth, the day a single human stood before the Council and laughed, and how that laughter had shaken the pillars of power that no war ever could. Humanity had not only rewritten the fate of the galaxy, they had rewritten the nature of power itself. Still, the mystery of where they had gone continued to haunt the minds of philosophers and scientists alike. Some believed they had ascended into energy, others claimed they had hidden beyond time, and a few whispered that they had become the very consciousness of the stars. Whatever the truth was, the silence of humanity was louder than ever, because their absence had become the heartbeat of the galaxy. In the Concord of Worlds, the successor to the fallen council, new leaders gathered every cycle to commemorate the day of departure, when humanity vanished from known space. The ceremony was held under a dome of glass that looked out at the vast night sky. No statues were built in their image, no temples erected in their honor. Only a single empty chair sat at the center of the hall, facing the stars. It was said to represent the seat humanity had once held in the Council, a seat no one dared to occupy again. Delegates of every species would stand in silence for 1 full minute, and during that silence, they could all hear it, soft, almost imperceptible, the faint sound of laughter carried by the wind that moved through the chamber. No instrument, no machine could record it, yet everyone heard it in their own way. Some said it was imagination. Others knew it was not. The laughter was humanity's promise, that they were still watching. But peace, as history had always shown, is fragile. Deep within the shadows of the outer rim, old ambitions stirred again. A new faction, calling itself the Dominion of Order, rose from the ashes of the old Council's ideologies. They preached that the galaxy had grown weak in humanity's absence, that peace without control was chaos waiting to return. Their leader, a Thaylen noble named Sereth, was charismatic and ruthless, claiming that he could restore the order that humanity's defiance had destroyed. "We worship their silence," Sereth declared before his followers, "but we forget they were conquerors first. They rose through blood and fire. To honor them, we must become what they once were." His words spread like a virus, reaching systems untouched by war for centuries. Fleets began to form once more, not to defend, but to dominate. The old fear crept back into the stars. When the first Dominion fleet invaded a border world of the Concord, it expected resistance. It found none. The world was empty, its cities abandoned, its systems quiet. The only thing left behind was a single message, glowing across every building and every shipyard: do not repeat our mistakes. The Dominion ignored it. They moved deeper, conquering more systems, forcing others to submit. And yet, something strange began to happen. Their ships started malfunctioning mid-flight. Weapons misfired. AI cores refused commands. Even entire nav computers would suddenly shut down, displaying fragments of old human code. Engineers couldn't explain it, but one pattern was consistent. Every failure came with a faint audio distortion. Always the same, always chilling, the sound of human laughter. Sereth dismissed it as superstition, but his soldiers whispered that humanity was returning, that the architects of freedom were coming back to end tyranny once more. Panic began to spread through his armies. Fleets vanished into uncharted space, chasing phantom signals that appeared on scanners for only seconds. Entire squadrons disappeared without a trace, leaving behind empty ships with the words "You were warned" scrawled across control panels in human script. At first, the Dominion thought it was sabotage from the Concord, but soon, even neutral traders began reporting the same phenomenon. Ghost ships drifting silently through the dark, human in design but older than any known model, their hulls gleaming with soft blue light. They never attacked. They never spoke. They just appeared when war was near and vanished once peace returned. The galaxy began to call them the Watchers. On the capital world of the Concord, the leaders debated in fear and wonder. Was this humanity's doing? Had they been there all along, hidden behind the veil of the void, waiting for the galaxy to test itself? The Concord's high speaker, an ancient being who had lived long enough to remember the old council, finally broke the silence. Perhaps they never left, she said. Perhaps they are the silence. And in that moment, every monitor in the chamber flickered to life. The screens filled with static, then formed an image, Earth, glowing in gold and white light. A voice, calm and powerful, spoke through every device in every system, echoing across the galaxy. You still reach for chains, it said, when you could reach for stars. We gave you silence to learn. Do not make us speak again. The transmission ended as suddenly as it began, and when the council checked their systems, they found something impossible. No signal origin, no trace of interference. It was as if the message had come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Across the galaxy, war came to a halt. The Dominion's fleets froze in space, their commanders trembling, afraid to move. The people, the traders, the miners, the wanderers, they all looked to the stars that night, and for the first time in centuries, the night sky shimmered with light. Millions of tiny flashes, each one glowing for only a second, like fireflies dancing in the dark. Scientists said they were meteors. The believers said it was a message. And the message was clear. Humanity was still out there, watching and waiting, and the galaxy was still their classroom. After that night, no one spoke of conquest again. The Dominion fell apart without a single battle. Its ships simply shut down, its leaders vanished, and its worlds were absorbed back into the Concord. The laughter returned once more, this time soft and distant, like the hum of the stars themselves. The Concord declared a new holiday, the Day of Light, honoring not the humans' departure, but their guidance. It became a celebration of hope, of courage, of the freedom to grow without fear. The galaxy had finally understood that the laughter that once defied the council was never mockery. It was love, the kind of love that comes from those who have seen destruction and still believe creation is worth the risk. And somewhere, far beyond the edges of the known universe, the Terran Fleet watched in silence. Inside the bridge of the flagship Eidolon, Admiral Hale smiled faintly, hearing the echoes of that same laughter rolling across the stars. They've learned, Myra said beside him. They finally understand. Hale nodded. Good, he whispered. Then our work is done. And as the fleet slowly drifted back into the eternal dark, the stars pulsed one last time, brighter than ever before, as if the universe itself was laughing along. Humanity had kept its promise, not to rule, not to destroy, but to teach the galaxy what it truly meant to live unbroken. 1,000 years had passed since the last message from humanity had echoed across the stars, yet the memory of their voice remained etched into the very heart of the galaxy. Time had reshaped empires and worlds, civilizations had risen and fallen like tides, but the laughter of mankind still lingered, a whisper carried by solar winds, a faint pulse in the deep dark between stars. The concord of worlds had endured, growing wiser, gentler, and freer than any society before it. War had become myth, conquest a forgotten curse, and the old hatred that had once fueled the Council's arrogance had long been buried beneath the ashes of history. Still, in the quiet corners of the cosmos, travelers would sometimes stop and listen, claiming that when the void grew still enough, they could hear it again, the soft, knowing laughter of a species that had once defied gods. On the anniversary of the Day of Light, the galaxy gathered once more under the vast dome of the Concord's capital, where the empty chair of humanity still stood untouched at the center of the hall. Generations had passed, but no one had ever dared to sit in it. It was a symbol now, not of absence but of presence, because everyone knew that the humans, in their silence, were still watching. The High Speaker, a frail Thalen elder whose crystalline body glowed faintly with age, stood before the assembly and raised her voice. "We gather," she said softly, "not to mourn, but to remember. For those who left did not vanish. They became the silence that holds our peace together." The crowd bowed their heads. Outside the glass dome, the stars shimmered like tears. And then, as if the universe itself had been waiting for that moment, something changed. Every light in the hall dimmed. Every hologram flickered. Every instrument fell silent. For the first time in living memory, even the hum of the Concorde system ceased. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, from beyond the stars, a soft light began to rise, not from any sun, not from any beacon, but from the darkness itself. It spread slowly across the sky, forming a vast, shimmering shape, like a hand reaching through the void, open and calm. Gasps filled the hall. Ships orbiting nearby reported their sensors going wild, detecting energy signatures beyond comprehension. The light grew stronger, and from it came a sound, not words, not music, but a pulse. A heartbeat. The High Speaker fell to her knees, tears streaming down her crystalline face. "It's them," she whispered. The heartbeat grew louder, steady and warm, echoing through every world, every mind, every soul that had ever heard the stories. Across the galaxy, people stopped what they were doing. Workers in factories looked up. Miners deep underground felt the walls tremble. Children playing under alien skies raised their hands to the light. And in that moment, the stars themselves seemed to whisper, as if carried on the breath of creation itself, "We are still here." The voice that followed was not one voice, but many, thousands blended into one, both ancient and new. It spoke in every language at once, every word perfectly understood. "You have learned," it said. "You have built without chains. You have chosen peace over power. And so, we return, not as rulers, not as gods, but as witnesses." The light pulsed brighter, illuminating the endless expanse of the cosmos. Then, out of that brilliance, shapes began to appear, colossal ships, vast and silent, gliding through the void like living shadows. They were human, unmistakably human, yet unlike any design the galaxy had ever seen. Their hulls shimmered with energy, their surfaces alive with golden veins of light that pulsed in rhythm with the heartbeat that filled the stars. The Terran Fleet had returned, but they did not come with weapons or threats. Instead, they came with a gift. The lead ship, a colossal vessel that dwarfed even the largest of the old Council dreadnoughts, opened its hull, revealing a glowing sphere within. A living sun, small but brilliant, radiating pure energy. The voice of humanity spoke again, calm and kind. "This is our memory," it said. "The fire that once burned in our world, now shared with all. Use it to create, not destroy. Keep it alive, and you will never lose your way." Then, with a flash of light, fragments of that energy broke off and streaked across the galaxy, seeding every world with warmth. Crops grew in barren soil. Storms calmed. Entire ecosystems healed in moments. The miracle was undeniable. As the light faded, the ships began to move again, slowly drifting toward the outer edges of known space. The High Speaker stood, her voice trembling. "Will you not stay?" she asked, looking up at the glowing sky. There was a long pause. Then came the reply, soft as a sigh. "We never truly left. Every star you see carries a piece of us. Every world that lives in peace honors our laughter. You no longer need us beside you. You have become what we hoped you would be." The fleet began to dissolve, their forms fading back into light, until only a single human figure remained visible. Tall, calm, smiling faintly as the stars shone through him. His voice was quiet, but it filled the universe. "We were broken once, but we learned to laugh. You did too. That is enough." And then he was gone. The stars returned to their normal brilliance, the ships vanished, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was sacred. Across the galaxy, billions wept, not from sorrow but from understanding. Humanity had not come back to rule. They had come back to say goodbye. But in doing so, they had given the galaxy something far greater than guidance. They had given it its soul. The Concord declared that day the beginning of a new age, the Age of Light. From then on, every world paused once a year to stand in silence and listen to the heartbeat of the stars. For in that rhythm, everyone could still hear the echo of the words that had changed the universe forever. They tried to break us. We laughed. And so the legend of Earth became eternal, not as a story of power or vengeance, but as a promise that no matter how dark the cosmos became, laughter would always bring the light back. In the cold, infinite night between galaxies, the stars continued to flicker with that same quiet rhythm, the universe itself humming softly in the key of humanity's unbroken spirit. A song that would never end, because it was written not in sound, but in the very heart of existence itself.